You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
What's up, MSP world? Welcome to the MSP Zone, where we talk managed services all the time, when we're recording, that is. We have a fantastic show for you today. Before we get started, I'd like to get your assistance. Go to our YouTube channel, MSPAlliance. Click the subscribe button. Give us a like if you like the content that we're producing. It'll really mean a lot to us. We're trying to do some live streaming, live guests, Q&A type of stuff in the new year, and this is all part of our strategy to be delivering a lot more information, shall we say, to all of you MSPs, wherever you are. There's a lot of you. Ton of you worldwide, and we want to do the best we can to serve you. So that would really help us a lot. Today, we've got three topics we're going to be talking about. First one is the end of ransomware. There's a movement now happening in the government sector that is really interesting, and we're going to talk about that, what it means for MSPs and for private sector customers. We're going to be talking about whether or not MSPs can be more proactive than you already are. Interesting question. And then finally, you can't sell compliance. You can't resell compliance, I should say. And that's going to be a really big discussion about what MSPs today are doing around compliance. If you are an MSP and not in the compliance game, but you want to be, let's say in 2024, this is going to be an episode you're definitely going to want to listen to. So let's dive right in, folks. Okay. End of ransomware? Question mark? Probably not. I'll give you the answer up front. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay attention to what we're going to be talking about, because this is a big movement. And here's what you need to know about it, okay? This started a couple of months ago as a government pledge, right? So this is not a law. This is not it's not a treaty. There's no legal binding aspect to this, apart from what the individual contributing, participating countries decide to do. This is a pledge, but it's important because it's a signal. It's a huge shot across the bow to the ransomware actors out there and letting them know what's coming. And at least if you're in the public sector, those of you not aware, public sector means, non-private sector, government agencies, government agencies, government customers, but not private sector. Okay. So government only. That's what we're talking about. This pledge, which I think has 48 governments participating as of right now, are pledging to not pay ransom if they are hit by a ransomware attack. So it includes the United States, it includes the European Union and Interpol, and I don't know how many. It might be just those. I don't know if it's just EU member states and the United States. I'm sure there's others. In fact, I'm almost positive there are others participating. But the point is, even if it was just the U.S. and the EU, it would be a huge area, a huge landmass participating in this pledge to not pay ransomware. What does it actually mean? So the commitment was made. I'm reading from the press. The commitment, which was made as part of last week's U.S.-led counter-ransomware initiative meeting, also strongly discouraged anyone from paying a ransomware demand, including private sector organizations and organizations responsible for critical infrastructure. MSPs, this is you. That's you they're talking about. No, they didn't use MSP by name. They're not going to. Organizations responsible for critical infrastructure. Well, that means any MSP that happens to have a public sector customer, that's going to be you. You're not going to have pay the ransomware as an option for recovery. Is it a hard rule? Is it a law? No. Does that give you wiggle room? I don't know. I mean, that's an unknown at this point. I would say if I was an MSP and I was planning for my 2024 with my customers, and I was having what I hope is an end of the year or beginning of the year planning strategy session, particularly if it's a VCIO type of a consulting offering that you deliver to your customers, I would be bringing this to their attention and saying, customers, we don't have pay the ransom option anymore. You can't do it. If it's even if it's not a law, there's going to be huge political pressure brought to bear on any public sector organization to seek out alternative means for cyber attack, ransomware recovery, and resiliency. And if you don't think that includes managed services providers, boy, I got another thing. You got another thing coming. I don't have another thing coming. You have another thing coming. This is a huge opportunity, MSPs. If you're paying attention and you happen to have a public sector customer, you should be bringing this to their attention if they're not already aware of it. And this assumes that they're in one of these geographies. But look, even if you're in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, maybe you're in the Middle East, maybe you're in the United Arab Emirates. We have a lot of MSPs out there. Maybe you're in Latin America, and you happen to have public sector managed services customers. I would be bringing this to their attention as well, because it's not going to be a long time before those organizations, those countries become part of this pledge as well. It's a movement, folks. It's a movement, and it's a movement that's spreading fast. Now, again, I said in the beginning that it's not it's not a law, it's not a treaty, right? So it has no binding legal effect, right? If you paid the ransomware, it's not like you can be hauled up and put in the stockade. You can't be fined. You can be fined. We've talked about that in the past about OFAC and that. And I think that that's a very real concern if you have customers who just continually lean on pay the ransom as a first go-to response. Again, if you're an MSP and you have a VCIO offering, and even if you don't, if you're talking to your customers at a level of a trusted advisor and they're asking you for guidance, I would be telling them, yeah, don't be looking at ransomware payment as just the easiest thing. There's a ton of consequence. There's a ton of questions that ought to be asked before you make such a move. Number one, can you trust the organization with whom you're doing business? How do you do it in a safe way? How do you make sure that you're going to, get the payment to the right people? How are you going to, this is such a complicated thing that they even have, I call them cyber bagmen, people who actually ferry cryptocurrency from the victim to the attacker to make sure that there's a clean handoff and that there's money that, the money gets to where it needs to go, and that the keys to unlock the ransomware files is delivered. But this is a big move, folks. When you have that many countries signing a pledge to not pay ransomware if they get attacked, it's the beginning of a major shift in policy. And mark my words, it's going to filter down into the private sector. It's going to filter down. Because this doesn't just impact public policy, remember. This impacts, again, like here in the United States, OFAC, right, funding of certain organizations that are on naughty lists, right? If you make a ransomware payment to one such group, you yourself and your organization could be in real hot water if that's disclosed. And by the way, how are you not going to disclose something like that, right? I mean, you're talking real danger and risk with these payments. And it's not like it's new. It's always been the risk. But this changes things. It really does change things. Now, does banning ransomware payments, is this going to stop ransomware attacks from happening? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's so lucrative and financially lucrative that people are going to still be doing it. It takes massive wide scale adoption of this no ransomware payment movement for this to see an impact. Now, I'm not ruling it out. I'm not saying it can't happen. Maybe we'll see it. But will it prevent it? No, because you're always going to have, particularly in the private sector, you're always going to have organizations. I mean, I hate to call it out, but I mean, it's pretty well known at this point. Caesars paid their ransom. MGM didn't. They shut down their systems, and they went through a lot more pain and suffering. You might be able to argue. They went through longer period of discomfort. Caesar said, we're not going to do it. We're going to make the payment. They did the payment, and there you go. Will organizations continue to think like that and behave like that? Probably. So, yeah, I don't think ransomware attacks are going to go away. They'll go away when they're caught. They're brought to justice, the people doing the bad stuff, or when they no longer find it lucrative. It doesn't pay them anything. That's an interesting, concept. It's not unlike the legalize, a little different, but legalize, drugs movement that we had a big public discourse starting in the 80s about drug legalization, primarily to deal with the associated crime that went with that. And, you might have strong feelings one way or the other. I'm not going to weigh in on that. I'm just saying it's an interesting similarity. So no, I don't think it's going to ban or stop ransomware attacks from happening. I do think that this government no ransomware payment pledge it should immediately change any MSP that has public sector customers in those impacted areas. So that means state and federal government managed services customers. I think you absolutely should have a talk with your customer and start to shift things around to prepare for cyber resilience that doesn't include a ransomware payment. That can mean a lot of things. Backing up your data more, backing it up at all, using multi-factor authentication, deploying EDR, SOC, SIM as a service types of technologies, improving your change management, right? Tightening the seams, getting things a little bit more crisp in terms of IT in those organizations. This should send a shot across the bow of the state agencies if they're paying attention to say, look, your time has come and gone for you to look at ransomware payments as a cyber resilience, cyber recovery option. I don't think it is anymore. I don't think they can look at it realistically that way. But that assumes, folks, this is a big assumption. The MSPs need to take this very seriously and to, I'm not going to say up their game, but I'm going to say you, the MSP, need to get in front of your customers who might be impacted by this and say to them, you don't have a choice anymore. This is what I would do. I would say, if you want me to be your MSP, we're going to make some changes and we're going to do this so that you don't have to be pressured into either your organization, your entity as government entity, whatever it is that you do, being shut down or making a ransomware payment that you no longer can make. Here's how we make you cyber resilient, and list out a plan for them. And yeah, it might cost them more, but guess what? It's going to be a lot cheaper than the ransomware payment. That's the sales point. That's the give them the pen, sign on the dotted line moment. Whatever it is you're going to give them to do, it's going to cost way less than making that payment. I guarantee you. Okay. And finally, private sector. I also think that if you don't have public sector managed services customers, you should still do some research on this. Go look it up online and start to inform your private sector customers of what's happening in the public sector and say, look, if you want to, if it's just me, you want to get ahead of this, it's probably not very long before state legislators, maybe even federal legislatures here in the United States, maybe in Canada, maybe in Europe, maybe elsewhere, start to actually pass laws that say we're going to ban ransomware payments. We don't want our citizens, our organizations making payments to, questionable entities. It's possible, folks. And if that does happen, you should be talking to your customers and preparing them in advance for being prepared. Just a thought. Just a thought. All right. Moving on. Can MSPs be more proactive? I actually thought this was a pretty amusing topic. So this was actually an article. All right. How MSPs can take on a more proactive role. And the reason I thought it was interesting is because if you're like me, or if you've been following MSPAlliance for the last 20 plus years, it should come as no surprise to you that we place a lot of stock in a particular word when we define what is managed services, what are MSPs. The word that has been around since 2004. I use that year very specifically because it was actually in 2004 in San Diego. I could probably get you the hotel that we were at, but it was in San Diego. It was a leadership retreat that the MSPAlliance had, and probably 10 or so MSP and other professionals from the industry were there, and we were talking about a lot of other things. It was the beginning of the discussion around what would become MSP Verify, our standard, but we also tackled other topics, including how do we define managed services? And the resulting definition included the word proactive as the pivotal word that differentiates MSPs from all other types of IT management. Okay? You with me so far? MSPs, defined as MSPs, must be proactive. If you're not proactive, you're not an MSP. Make sense? Okay. So can an MSP be more proactive? I suppose, but before we even get there, I guess I'd like to address the larger question, which is, what does this message send to non-MSPs, right? Because if you're a real MSP, you don't spend your day thinking, how do I become more proactive? If you're a break-fix company, you probably spend a lot of time saying, how do I get out of this and how do I become more proactive so I can be an MSP? Okay, that fits. But an existing MSP saying, well, I just don't feel very proactive. How do I become more proactive so I feel more like an MSP? I just don't think that happens. At least I don't talk to MSPs who say that. Maybe they don't say it to me. I don't think they say it. Okay, I don't think they say it. So what type of company is this article aimed at? that thought occurred to me, and I answered the question. I said, well, it's probably not MSPs. I don't think the MSP organization is the target for this type of an article, which is curious, right? So why do they have the term MSP in the article title? Clickbait? Sure, probably. Could they also have been talking to non-MSPs, companies that want to become more proactive and more like an MSP? Sure. So I wrote down some thoughts that I had after reading it and synthesized it a little bit. So I'll present those to you right now. Okay. Reactive IT providers, right? The first thing that needs to be said to you, actually, before I get there, I'm going to say this. Being more proactive means being an MSP. That's the whole point. Okay? I don't think you can be more proactive. You're either proactive or you're not proactive. It's kind of like you can't be a little bit pregnant or a lot pregnant. You're pregnant or you're not pregnant. You're proactive or you're not proactive. You're an MSP or you're not an MSP. It's not really, there's not a lot of gray area. Now, there is a lot of efficiency difference between MSPs. Huge, right? I mean, you could be more efficient, less efficient. You could be more profitable. You could be more scalable than others. But in terms of being proactive, you could be proactive and be highly manual, meaning inefficient. That's possible. Now, you won't scale. You won't scale at all the more manual your service delivery is. But you could be proactive and manual. Sure. I've seen it. I've actually seen a lot. It's probably one of the first steps out of reactive IT I've seen this especially early on in the early 2000s. We saw a ton of this where you were dealing with VARs and system integrators who did a ton of project work. So they were very good at project management, and they were typically, some of them, very good at selling product, hardware, software, and then wrapping those hardware, software sales into a project of some sort. One of the first stages of their evolution into managed services would be delivering proactive IT managed services, but in a highly manual way. It's just one of the things that used to happen a lot. It still happens today. It doesn't happen as much today as it used to because there are a lot of tools, there's a lot of documentation, there's standards, MSP Verify. There's a lot of guidance to help those reactive companies become proactive, which leads me to my second point, which is to the reactive IT providers who this article, I think, is really aimed at. Know this. There are expectations MSPs have of you, okay? If you're a break-fix IT shop, and you don't want to be one tomorrow or next year, and you want to be an MSP, number one, great. We could use the help. We need you on our team. Come on, let's do it. But after saying that, we'd also say, and we'd want you to hear this loud and clear, there are expectations that MSPs have of you, that your professional community has of you, of what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. And you should be aware of that. You can't just think of this as I get to do whatever I want and I'm going to call myself an MSP when I'm really not one. Those days gone. No, we don't live in those days anymore. Those types of companies get called out a lot. I mean, when I'm at these peer groups, the Inspire peer groups, I listen to the MSPs talking, and they're pretty brutal when it comes to calling out local kind of posers, right? They're claiming to be an MSP, but they're not really. Most of these MSPs that are in the peer group are very they don't like that. They don't like it at all. So to the reactive IT companies out there listening to this, we want you on our team. We want you to make this switch to managed services, and we want you to become more proactive, like the article says. But you have expectations of what you need to be doing, and that is very critical if you want to call yourself and count yourself amongst the professional MSP organizations in the world. And remember, I said there's differences in efficiency, but you can't be a little proactive. You can't be more proactive than you were today. You can be more efficient. You can be more profitable, more scalable. All those things can come, but you're either proactive or you're not. Sorry, I just don't see it any other way. If you're not proactive, guess what? You're reactive. You're a break fix company. And it doesn't mean that your heart's not in the right place. Doesn't mean that you're not trying to do the best for your customer. And I know a lot of you who are still in the break fix camp. I know a lot of you are there not because of your own choosing, but because you have customers who just they don't get it and they don't want to pay you for what they think is, I don't know what they think managed services is. It's not more expensive. I think managed services is one of the least expensive things on the planet when it comes down to predictability and budgetability. And this is a way separate topic, right? But there's so much have been studied, said, written, talked about managed services actually lowering the total cost of ownership for a object, software object, hardware object, doesn't matter. It lowers over time the cost of managing that object. Because if you leave it in an unmanaged state, if you take the life cycle of that object, right, from the very beginning, day one when it was sold to the user or the organization, to the very last day when it's decommissioned or it stops working, if you take that compared to an average managed services contract to manage that device, the MSP route's going to be cheaper, guaranteed. Total cost of ownership, it's going to be cheaper. Okay, so hope that helps. I just thought it was an interesting article. Moving on to our final segment, you can't resell compliance, and this is coming up a lot more frequently because we're, a lot of you know that we've been doing a lot this year to invest into a lot more training, a lot more educational information and resources to our certified community all over the world to help them become more not just competent, well equipped, well provisioned, capable of dominating this new territory called compliance. It's not new territory, but you get what I'm saying. If you are an MSP and you sell compliance as a service, or even, this is probably more common and probably more covers more of you out there, VCIO, vCISO services, something of that caliber, VCTO. I mean, there's a lot of different things, but VCIO would probably be a good common managed services offering that you would see from a lot of MSP websites. What we are seeing from our vantage point is that those types of companies historically have blended some consulting, some advisory, and a little bit of compliance historically, like over the last 10, 15 years. Moving forward, those VCIO services for the smart MSPs, the ones who are going to really unlock monumental revenue opportunities, they're going to use their VCIO services as more compliance discussions. And again, I almost like VCIO better than compliance as a service. I really do, because it already fits into something that the MSPs are familiar with. They're already selling it, the ones that are doing it, to their managed services customers. So there's nothing new, right? And if that is you, I probably wouldn't even add compliance as a service to your website or to your offering. I would just say, look, our VCIO service now includes compliance, and here's what we're going to be doing. And just make it a natural addition to what you already have been doing for your customers. Back to that point, I think that starting now, but certainly next year, you should be planning on your VCIO services to have a lot more compliance conversations. And that means that you as an MSP need to speak MSP compliance. What does that mean? Speak MSP compliance. It means that you have to be aware of generally two things, which I'll describe momentarily. And then I'll explain at the end what it doesn't mean. All right. To speak MSP compliance and to be conversant in MSP compliance as a language for your VCIO services means, number one, you have to understand the compliance frameworks, the regulatory frameworks in some cases, that impact your customers the most. Here's a tip, professional tip of the day. You might have a couple. It's probably not going to be just one, especially if you're a well-diversified MSP, like I know many of you are. You've got tons of customers across probably 2, 3, 4, 5 different market segments, right? Maybe you have some banks, maybe you have financial services, maybe you have hospitals, maybe you have insurance companies, maybe you have legal, maybe you have state governments, small and municipal governments, maybe you have entertainment, maybe you have shipping, maybe you have whatever. You get my point. All of those segments have at their core one or sometimes multiple frameworks or regulatory laws, rules, requirements associated with them. As a VCIO delivering MSP, you need to be aware of that, and you need to be conversant in that. The easy one. If you are an MSP and you are in the United States, actually, doesn't matter where you are. If you're an MSP anywhere and you are helping a customer, a managed services customer of yours who happens to be in the defense industrial base, it is highly likely, if not a foregone conclusion, that they are going to be implicated by CMMC. They're going to have to respond to CMMC at some point. So will you. Just hint, reading ahead. So you better be aware of CMMC. Does that mean that you have to memorize all of the CMMC controls? No. But you should be generally aware of it. You should be more than generally aware of it. You should be aware of it as a concept. You should be aware of it as a framework, and you should be aware of what the framework generally says. Meaning that you should have all the control classes that are in CMMC. You should know what they are, and you should know how it impacts any one of those given defense industrial base customers that you manage. Okay? That's what I mean. Number 2, you as the MSP delivering VCIO services also need to be conversant in your own MSP controls. Now, this is the hang up. This is where everybody gets confused, and I can understand why, because it's a dense topic, but I'm going to try to make this simple. If the first part made sense, that you, the MSP, have to be conversant in the framework that is impacting your customer, you must recognize that you yourself have an obligation, have a framework, have an industry best practice that you must meet. Remember the last segment, right? You, as an MSP, have expectations placed upon you as a participant in the professional MSP community. Okay? There are MSP frameworks. There's only one MSP framework, but there are MSP best practices. Okay? You should be aware of what those are, and they are not embedded in CMMC. Some similarities, some crossover, but there's a lot that is missing because it's not an MSP framework. You need to be conversant in your own compliance. What does that mean? It means you need to understand, just like you need to understand your customers' controls, policies, procedures, and what they have, what they don't have. You also have to be aware of what you have and what you don't have. Why is that true? Because if you don't understand what your own controls are, you will never be able to advise your customer on what their controls ought to be. Beyond just saying, hey, you need to have this control. Now, for those of you who are uninitiated in compliance or VCIO infused with compliance, that still may not make sense. You may be scratching your heads and saying, "Well, geez, I don't get this. We resell a GRC tool, and so aren't we offering compliance as a service? I mean, I thought that's what that all meant." I would like to address that. I'd like to address that. No, you cannot resell a tool and instantly become a compliance as a service MSP. You can't do it. It's not enough. You can't resell an RMM license and give it to a customer and say, here's a license of RMM. Pick your RMM vendor. And I'm not anti-RMM, folks. I'm making a point here. You can't be an organization. I couldn't take my favorite RMM. I don't have favorites. I like them all. I can't take any given RMM and give it to a third party and say, here, I'm an MSP because I resold that, and now you're a managed services customer. It doesn't work that way. I actually have to use it. I have to incorporate it. I have to wrap a service around that RMM tool. That's how it works. The same is true with compliance. You can't resell a GRC tool and say, hey, I'm in the compliance as a service business. Guess what? You're not. You're in the GRC resale tool business. That's what you're in. I don't know what else you're doing. Maybe you're offering, or you think you're offering, compliance consulting. Maybe, probably not. But you're not doing anything special that anyone else can't do on the planet. But the MSP, CAS MSP, VCIO MSP, who understands and can speak MSP compliance, knows what your own controls look like, and know how those controls fall through and flow through down to the customer, and how those controls impact that customer's compliance journey, you get it. If that makes sense, you get it. You've taken one step, you've taken 2 or 3 steps towards understanding compliance as a VCIO concept, which for the next 5+ years is going to be raining money in terms of the opportunity, the genuine need by managed services customers to get a grasp on their internal cybersecurity and other governance controls and just the way their organizations work. If they have any hope of preparing for cyber resilience so they don't have to rely on being, making a payment one day when they get breached, that's the role you as an MSP can play. That's the role. Don't just sell them a tool. You're not doing anything. You're literally just throwing money at a problem and expecting it to be fixed. It's not going to work. consult with them, advise with them, help them. If I had a list of all the CMMC controls right now, and I do, I wouldn't be just giving those controls to a customer and say, fill it out and let me know when you're done. I'd be working with them. I'd be consulting, advising them, guiding them. That is what would make a difference. That is, by the way, what would make me valuable to that customer. If I was an MSP, that's why I would be valuable. The tool, the GRC tool, doesn't do it. The list of controls doesn't do it. Mapping doesn't do it. Me understanding how I, as an MSP, am impacting that customer and that customer who wants to achieve a certain compliance framework, that's the magic. If you can master that, the world is your oyster. Folks, hope you enjoyed the show. Give us a like, subscribe. You know the drill. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you'll get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.